Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Eating at a Meeting, where we talk to farmers and doctors and eaters and chefs all about eating at a meeting. And I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath, founder of the podcast Eating at a Meeting and Thrive Meetings and Events. And with the show, my goal is to educate us all on how to create safe, sustainable, delicious, and inclusive food and beverage experiences. And today on the show, I have Mary Hart Rigdon of Decimal Place Goat Dairy, a farm that's about 25 years old and outside or in the heart of Atlanta. And I've been buying her goat cheese for I don't know, 10 years now when I lived in Atlanta, but we were just talking about how she got started. So welcome to the show, Mary.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. So we were just talking about what we get, how Morningside Farmers Market started and then how you got started, but you graduated from UGA with a degree in animal science.
Yes.
And then can you tell everyone how you got into goat dairy farming?
I had worked with sheep out west. Once I got my degree, I worked with pigs, and then I worked with sheep in Oklahoma and Texas. And the native New Zealander that I worked with taught me about the high tensile electric fencing and rotational grazing and how to birth and work with the sheep. And then I tasted a sheep's milk yogurt in England and thought, oh, that'll be great. I can have a product every day with milking sheep rather than the wool and the meat, which weren't as highly accepted at that point. And so I came back to Georgia and told my girlfriends what I was going to do. And they said, don't reinvent the wheel. There have been dairy goats in this country for 100 years. And so I started looking into the dairy goat, and they were a much better match because they ate the poison ivy, the privet, the kudzu, the honeysuckle, and utilized everything that way to make that tasty milk. So I kept on doing my research, and I lived on 1/10 of an acre in Grant Park at that moment. And so started making cheese from a book from the library, and then found my property here and went forward from there.
Well, okay, so two things that came to mind on that. So you got a book from the library. That's how you taught yourself how to make cheese.
I got the first book from the library, and then I got another book from one of the, it's called Hager Supply. Now, Miss Hager has passed away, but they had a wonderful business of dairy goat or goat in general products.
Okay.
And so books on cheese making, books on how to keep your farm, hoof trimmers, those kinds of things that you would use with your goats. And so I called her because when I got to the point in the book where it said, okay, now get out all your cheese molds and put your cheese in those molds. And I thought, if I don't even know how to make cheese, why would I do the investing in all of these plastic molds? And
right.
When I called and spoke to the woman at the goat supply place, she said, oh, this little book here says you just put it in a cheesecloth and drain it.
Oh.
I looked at cheesecloths and thought, I don't want to lose all of my milk through those big holes. And I used 100% cotton sheet and made my cheesecloths to fit the size of my colander. And it worked really well until I spoke to someone else several years later, and they said, oh, well, we're using no-see-um mosquito netting as ours. And then as I transitioned to a grade A dairy, then I picked up the products that were more suited to being a grade A dairy.
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, just by learning, you learned how to do it by just kind of inventing at the same time.
Well, time passes and people told me at that point that I was kind of nutty. What was I doing? But I believed in the animal. I had tasted cheese that was made by a woman who was totally living off the grid. And she said, I can make anything because I get interlibrary loan. Now, these days, you have the internet and there's so many possibilities available to you that the sky's the limit. So it's just everyone has 24 hours in the day, and it's how you utilize those 24 hours to make life a better place for everybody.
Exactly. Now, okay, and we're going to talk about 24 hours in a day. You wake up at 4?
No, 4 is only on Saturday mornings for the farmer's market, because at that point I have all my cheeses made for the market, put them into the ice chests, get the milking of the animals done. I start that at 6, load everything into the truck before that, wake the goats up at the last minute, and then milk them, wash the system, and head on to market. So I have to be at market before 8 o'clock to set up and sell. Otherwise, I get up at 6 and then go out and we start milking chores 7:15, 7:30. But I have checked everybody, made sure that everybody's happy enough. And just taking that few moments to look at everyone tells you how they're feeling, if there's a problem. This time of year, there's nobody that I know of that's going to have a baby anytime soon. But in January, February, March, first thing I do is check to make sure, is there a new baby on the ground? And I have careful records kept, so I have a basic idea, but it's always good to, take that first morning look at everybody, just like you'd say to your family, good morning and how are you?
Right. And they're your family. And how many members of your family do you have?
We're milking 47 at the moment. 40 is my target, but 7 of those are first-time mothers. So they're learning and growing. And then there's 20 young females, and I think I have 8 babies still left.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so there's quite a few articles that I've seen on you. Garden and Gun did a great story. I know Katie Hayes, Community Farmers Market in Atlanta, did one as well in the AJC. So, but they're grazing out on a field. Do you feed them? Do they just eat on the field?
We have, fortunately enough, now, when we moved in here, we had 12 and a half acres. We're now up to 40 acres.
Wow.
I have that fenced so that I can rotationally graze it. 75% of their diet is out there with the kudzu, the privet. We've got open pastures and we've got trees and woods, so that in the summertime, in the middle of the heat of the day, they're in the woods, able to keep cool. And then we feed them an all grain ration. So it's corn and oats and molasses in the morning and evening when we milk. And then those who haven't met their nutritional needs have alfalfa hay available to them in the evening. And I'll see the younger ones who have finished and gotten all their needs met, they'll go and lie down. And the really heavy milkers are the ones standing there having a little extra protein. And that's why it's the alfalfa, because it's that little bit extra protein so that they can keep their bodies in shape.
Okay. So, and I'm just thinking really quickly, because on Instagram the other day, Jennifer Hill Booker, chef, she actually hired goats to come eat her yard. So, and she rented goats.
That's right. It's become a nice little niche business for some folks, and it's really a great thing. Mine don't go and do that at other places because the stress of getting them into a trailer and moving them. But I have a specifically built building to the specifications of Department of Ag for the state of Georgia. Each state interprets the rules and regulations of that pasteurized milk ordinance in their own special way. Okay. So with that building built, twice a day, every day, we milk in that building. So my goats know what the routine is, where they're supposed to go. They have 2 dogs that travel with them every single day, everywhere they go, to keep them safe. And it's just if something comes into the pasture, the dogs will make it, whatever it is, leave. But they don't leave the pasture chasing whatever it is. They stay with their animals to keep them safe.
I love that. And you had a picture of one of your animals, one of the dogs, on Instagram the other day, I think, just saying thank you to him. Okay, so it is, and it's funny when I called you and I said, okay, it's goat cheese month. And you're like, what? So when I was doing some research on annual goat cheese month, goat cheese been around for 9,000 years when goats were first domesticated, is what I read. Okay, so I don't know where I'm going with this, but you worked with cows and you worked with swine, pigs, and then you went to goat. So the difference between goat cheese and cow cheese or milk and variety of that. And then because I talk about allergies, can we talk about, is there a difference in that? And can people with food allergies eat goat cheese that they can't eat cow cheese?
Everyone's systems are so different and unique. But goat cheese, the fat molecule is like ABCD, where a cow milk molecule has so many more fatty acids. It's like the whole alphabet. And folks that have tender stomachs, it's easier for their stomachs to break those bonds of the goat milk rather than the cow milk. Now, cow milk has carotene, where goat milk does not. It has vitamin A, but it doesn't have the carotene. So seasonally, cow milk will change color just a little bit. And because folks in the grocery store it didn't look the same as it did last year or last week, that cow industry put annetto as an orange dye in there so that they would not have the seasonality of the color changes. And that's why you have the annetto. But the goat's milk is always white.
Okay.
And so with the goat's milk, I'm able to satisfy the needs of some folks, because in the cow dairy industry, when I was there, they were using an iodine teat dip to wash before you milk. You wash the animal and make sure they're clean. And I started using chlorine because bleach is really inexpensive, but it does a great job. Now I've moved to a chlorine-based cleaner.
Okay.
But it's still that chlorine-based, because some of the folks that were friends of mine originally said, oh, we're allergic to the iodine. That's why we can't have cheese.
Wow.
So I don't use an iodine teat dip. In my cheeses, when I make them, I don't start with a mold inhibitor. It's just a fresh cheese. And I started making the cheese for my family, so it was always going to be fresh. And I had so many people that, as I talked about doing this, came down the driveway and said, somebody else's cheese made my system itch. Well, because I hadn't started with a mold inhibitor and I knew I just wanted to sell a fresh cheese.
Right.
There's no mold inhibitor in the cheese. It's just the good bacteria, an organic vegetable rennet, and then some coarse kosher salt if the recipe calls for that. The creamy goat cheese that I make is no salt in it at all. And I had one chef that said, there's not enough salt in your cheese. And I said, but chef, if I put too much in, you can't take it back out. So you should make a decision. And so for the folks who have heart trouble that way and need that low salt diet, they can utilize this cheese. And the one woman whose husband had a heart attack and was just really jonesing for a pizza, she could make the pizza sauce and the crust and then get my cheese with no salt in it. And he could have that pizza and not totally blow his diet because he had so much trouble.
Wow, that's amazing. And so my friend Charlie is having that right now. So I'm going to have to somehow get my cheese from you from Atlanta. Now, Nancy, I need you to explain, can I do that too? Because I just saw your message and I don't know what you were referring to. So can you type in a little bit more description of what Mary was talking about and what you asking? So that's really interesting. And when we were chatting the other day too, the freshness of your cheese is a big difference, because I do know people that say they can have like the moldy, the older cheese. Oh, renting goats. Yes, you can rent goats from somewhere in New Jersey. I'm sure you could. My friend Jennifer Hill Booker just did it as well. So I mentioned that, but there's so much, the freshness of your cheese it's so good. And it lasts like 2 weeks, right? You said
2 to 3 weeks. Because what I try and do is the first part of the week, the restaurants get what I've made from Sunday till Wednesday. And then Thursday and Friday, the cheeses that I've made go to the farmer's market at the Carter Presidential Library. They have the market out in the parking lot there. Thanks to those folks allowing us to do that.
Right.
But that way, 2 to 3 weeks, if you keep it in, good refrigeration.
Mm-hmm. And, okay, so that's an interesting point too, because I was chatting with a farmer I was chatting with a chef up in Alexandria, and he was trying to get local eggs for his conference center. And the farmer said, I can't do that because I would have to forego all my general consumers. So you found a balance. It's mostly restaurants, not convention centers. Is that correct?
Well, that's right. It's the farm to table restaurants and folks that appreciate the cheese. As I was starting into this, I helped the Morningside Farmers Market, and they did a Shop with a Chef demo, which introduced the folks to, the chef had shopped that market and he made a dish from what was there. And as a beginning cheesemaker, I'd say, would you taste this and tell me, is it quality enough? Am I on the right track? And those folks were very lovely about it and complimented it. But when I had my grade A building up and going and was ready to go commercial, I contacted some of those folks and I wasn't as successful. They'd either gotten their own restaurants in bigger places or, had moved to someplace else. So I started with the farmers markets again, which is what I had friends and farmers there. And as I did the farmers markets and the demos, the chefs that were doing that farm to table stuff, I met them and we moved on from there. So Chef Terry Koval, who now has his restaurant at Deer and Dove, was originally with the Farmburger Group. And Farmburger has been very wonderful all through the pandemic to support me. Stephen Satterfield was at a restaurant in Decatur where I had known the chef that was there before him. And I think he was a sous chef at that time, getting ready to start his own restaurant. And as he started up his restaurant, because I brought the sample for the other chef, he knew the flavor of the cheese and asked to have that at his restaurant once I was grade A.
And both Terry and Stephen are, if you're looking for a great restaurant to eat in Atlanta.
Lovely. Yeah. Miller Union is Stephen Satterfield's restaurant, and Deer and Dove is Chef Terry's restaurant. And they're both wonderful folks to work with.
So Nancy, if you're going back, I don't know, Deer and Dove, I'm going to tag them. If you're going back and doing an event in Atlanta, make sure you check out both of those as well. All right, so she just said, I don't think goat rental is viable in Morris County. We don't have enough land, but this would be for grass, not for milk. Yes. I'm finding this very interesting. Fat molecules, iodine, levels of salt. So one of the things in one of the other articles I found, it was really about the science behind it, and you love the science behind it.
I do.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, you have to remember that the good bacteria is working to change the milk molecule, and then the rennet is what coagulates and stops the reaction. So in the creamy goat cheese, you've got more of the good bacteria, and a very small amount of rennet, and that cheese sits overnight. And as the molecules are changed by the good bacteria, then ever so slowly that, because sometimes in a 5-gallon pot of chèvre, the creamy goat cheese, you only use 18 drops of the vegetable rennet.
Wow.
To coagulate that milk, but it happens over 24 hours.
Okay.
And so the feta cheese, there's less of the culture, more of the rennet. The culture grows at a higher temperature, slightly higher temperature. And then an hour later, you add quite a bit of rennet. It's a teaspoon of rennet per gallon of milk. And that seizes and stops that reaction. And then you cut the curds, drain them that same day and press them. The next day, I cut that ball of cheese into slices and salt it with the coarse kosher salt. And then the last bits of whey drain off of it, and it's ready to put in containers and take to either restaurants or markets.
Wow.
But it's those interactions of that good bacteria with the rennet that makes all of your different cheeses. And you could make brie, you could make Parmesan, and you can make blue cheese, but blue cheese is the most, it's the strongest bacteria. And if you're making blue cheese, that's all you're going to make.
Oh,
Everything
really?
be blue. Because at one point I was playing with making brie, and the penicillin mold that you use to cover the brie jumped from the brie to the chèvre. And so I had cheese in a case at one of the location, and I don't do very many store locations, but Pine Street Market, and they kept an eye on it, and they said, we've had some mold growth on the creamy cheese. What's that? I said, pull it from the case. But what it was the penicillin mold of the brie that I was making in that small room. It jumped from one to the other. And back when I was making cheese in the house for the family, somebody brought us a dark beer as a present for Christmas. And the kitchen in an L-shaped house, the cheese was over draining in the kitchen in heart-shaped molds for Christmas presents. And I had the beer in the other side of the house. And the next morning when I woke up, there was brown fuzzy mold growing all over those little heart-shaped cheese.
Okay, so I really kind of want to know what jumping means. And Nancy's like, I'm having a problem with this penicillin mold concept. So is it how does it jump? I mean, is it just in the air?
In the air. If you're going to make bread with yeast, then the bread yeast, if you're making the bread with the yeast in your kitchen and you're trying to make cheese as well, the yeast fights with the cheese making bacteria and stuff doesn't work.
Wow.
You've got all these molds and things in your environment anyway. We're culturing certain ones.
Right.
And trying to keep the bad ones from growing. I mean, that's why you pasteurize, is so that you kill the harmful bacteria and then you incubate the good bacteria for your cheeses so that you get the flavor profiles you want. And there's 8 to 10 different chèvre creamy goat cheese cultures that you can use. You can use buttermilk from the grocery store to be your culture for your cheese making. Wow. Who knew?
Okay. That's so scientific, and
the other part of it is that if I had sauerkraut one night for dinner and didn't think about it. Sauerkraut is a fermented product. I had little red dots all over that cheese the next day in my house.
Wow. Who would have thought? And I mean, and I guess if you're doing kombucha, it would be the kind of the same thing too.
Folks are really kind about, you should try my kefir. It's like, no, thank you very much. I'm glad that folks use it and like it. And I know it's a really great product, but I don't do it.
Right.
I don't do, if I make yogurt now, I make it in the house for myself only.
Gotcha.
Because it's different bacteria. And I keep that room out there. I mean, if I don't have a beer and go out in the evening to the cheese room, if I had, I'd change shirts, I'd brush my teeth, I'd make sure that I wasn't taking that out too, because it's with you. So I'm really careful. My mother came to visit back in the day. She said, well, can we have cocktails? I said, is it fermented or distilled? So as a cheesemaker, it's a different thing to think about.
Wow. Okay. So because I was eating the cheese, I want to talk about the different types of cheese. So the first piece that I had, that little square, was tuma. And when you explained it to me at the market 2 weeks ago, it's like a ricotta.
Well, it's like a mozzarella.
Mozzarella. Okay.
It's a fresh mozzarella type of cheese.
Mm-hmm.
That one only lasts a week because the recipe is an Italian basket cheese.
Okay.
So the Italian folks would milk their animals in the morning and then start that cheese. It incubates for an hour with just a rennet. You pour boiling water over it to cook the curd, and then you put it in a basket or a mold, and it takes the shape of whichever, and then it drains for that day, and you're ready to have it for dinner that night or, through the week.
It's really yummy.
But it's not found in most stores because it's supposed to be fresh.
Okay. Gotcha.
And then my husband just wanted a slicing cheese to have on sandwiches. The creamy goat cheese just wasn't doing it for him.
It wasn't?
For the sandwich, no.
All right. And then you've got the chèvre. Is that right?
That's correct. That's the creamy goat cheese.
Creamy goat cheese. And so
spreadable.
Yep.
Mix it with honey. Mix it
on salads.
On salads, mix it with honey, mix it with jam. We had it last night where I sauteed cabbage and carrots and put some mushrooms in there and dill and caraway with the goat cheese and put it in a puff pastry sheet, baked it. And
wow, that sounds delicious.
Fancy cuisine. But it's cabbage and goat cheese.
Yeah, wow. And then feta. So those are the three that you sell, or you sell others?
Well, that's the three. Occasionally, I will make a cheddar.
Okay.
But cheddar takes all day to make with all the steps, so that mostly you won't find that as a goat cheese.
Okay.
It just spreads out my market that little bit for the folks who have the allergies and sensitivities.
Okay.
And then in January and February, when everybody goes on a diet, and there's not as many folks at the farmers markets, there are times when I will wax one or two of those cheddars and put them into a small refrigerator and age them. Okay.
Well, okay. That's because that's an older cheese. It's not as fresh.
That's
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And somebody asked at one point, well, how long do you age it? It's like, well, how hungry am I?
I want some right now. I want some for dinner tonight.
But when you talk about cheese making through the ages, there was a gentleman who I met, and he said that in World War II, he had gone through Italy, and the people had kept on saying, oh, don't you have any food? Don't you have any food? And he said, I just saw all your cheese in caves. Why are you starving? They said, it's not ready yet. We couldn't possibly eat it. But that was, they were so used to that this was the way it needed to be, that they weren't going to touch that cheese before it was time.
Wow. Okay. You mentioned a story of an older gentleman that came by to visit you. Oh, yeah. It was in our conversation yesterday. No, I don't remember what it was.
Well, the nice part about having goats is because they're so universal. There's people all around the world who use the goat's milk and the goat's meat. So folks have come down my driveway from Nigeria, from Bosnia, from Afghanistan, that my husband had asked at one point, were we running the UN here? But because all of these people know goats,
it's the number one meat eaten around the world.
Right. Because they're more efficient at converting what they eat into milk or meat. And they're pleasant, easy to deal with. Most of the time they have their little tricks, and if you're trying to keep them in one spot and they think they need to go to another, your fences better be in good shape, or they'll have tried everything to get to where they would like to be. But they're really personable, and I've enjoyed and appreciated that. But when they come from, Puerto Rico, where there's refrigeration there, but there are places where there's not the refrigeration.
Right.
To be able to make a fresh product with the milk that they get every day and have that as a protein source for the children that are there, that's really important. Now, for myself, when I started into this, I made sure that I purchased animals that had come from a herd that had tuberculosis and brucellosis testing, and they tested for another disease that affected the goats, not people, and that was caprine arthritic encephalitis.
Okay.
And so for years, I maintained those, that every year I was tested for that. And then at one point, someone said, there's this thing called scrapie, which was a like mad cow. And I started having the herd tested for that, and now have my export status because I started with that in 2000. And so after staying on that program with the state for all these years, when they had the trouble in Nepal, I was able to send 5 goats. Now, this was a government to government transfer. This wasn't from me to them, but other people in the goat industry brought that about. And 5 of my animals, because I keep milk records that are, so an independent person comes and samples and weighs the milk, and the samples get sent off to a lab in Oklahoma so that the butter fat, the protein amounts, it's called a somatic cell count, but it's an indicator of the possibility of an infection. And once a month, all of those samples go to Oklahoma for the lab to test that. The milk weights are written down and recorded nationally. And then the Department of Agriculture, the state of Georgia, comes every month and pulls their samples to run through their laboratory to check the health and the quality of the milk, so that all of those things are done for the people that utilize the milk and for my animals. And each time I purchased a piece of property that was contiguous to what I had, we went in and cleaned up and tidied up and made sure that everything was just right for goats before we went in.
I love the fact that you're so, the government part of it, but that you want to make your herds happy, that you want to make sure that you're producing the right food and cheeses for your customers, whether they're restaurants or just the general public, and that you're raising them humanely.
I got into this to have a nice time of it. The folks that are here helping me, we all have a really nice time, but we're all here to work and get this done. And it's a lot of fun when you look at it that way. And I've been very, very fortunate over the years to have a lot of lovely folks that have needed help for, having a job so that they could have an income, but that we all work together to make something happen.
All right. So, Okay. So LA just asked, how many goats do you have? And Nancy answered her 47. But Nancy had a question here. She's like, I hate to ask this question, but absent of being in Atlanta, because she's in Jersey, do you have any commercial brands that you recommend? Or she said, we do have Jersey Girl cheeses here at our farmer's market. Do you know any goat farmers up in Jersey? Milk goat farmers?
No, I'm sorry, but the American Dairy Goat Association has a membership list, and you would be able to find goats through that. And because I'm originally a Jersey girl myself, it's a great place to have the goats. And Araby Farm is up in northern New Jersey, but it just depends on, they're primarily looking at structure and function and just raising a few animals. They do a very good job of it, because I had a buck here of theirs for 4 years, and he did a really great job increasing the structure and the better feet and legs so that my animals could walk better through the pastures. But it's local pockets that you have to look for. And it's not easy as far as the rules and regulations to start up and build the dairy. I mean, by building, I just decided that I was going to do this because so many people came down my driveway with the allergies and the sensitivities. I told my husband I thought I really could make this into a business, but I had another person who I got involved with who said he would build the building, but if he had other projects that he needed to step off and go to, that's fine. So it took us 6 to 8 months to build that building. And it was just a forever project. And I've been a grade A legal dairy for 13 years now.
Okay.
So, and, it's twice a day, every day is not easy for everyone to do. But I enjoy the goats. I enjoy what I do. And I enjoy the people that I meet both at the farmer's market and through the restaurants. The restaurants that I go to, the folks there are lovely. They really are. So I've had a really good time of it. When people talk about your neighbors, I know the people at the farmers markets a little bit better than the folks that live at the far end of the driveway. I mean, the driveway is pretty long, so I don't know those folks, but it's like my neighbors are the folks that I meet at the farmers markets. So
that's awesome. Well, I just posted, Nancy, a link to the Good Food Awards, which gives awards out for cheeses. And so you can, I looked in your area, there's some up in the Northeast, but nobody in Jersey has won a Good Food Award. But that doesn't mean that there's not good cheese in New Jersey, goat cheese in New Jersey. And Nancy says, Jersey Girl is making their cheese in Branchville. Interesting, and that Mary is from New Jersey. Yeah, small world. And she knows somebody from New Bern, but we're not going to talk about that. You started this because you wanted to do something good too, but keeping your herd happy, how do you do that? Because that's an important part. And can we talk about sustainability? How does that work with, what your practices that you're doing sustainability wise?
Well, we take the goats to the different pastures. I have one place on the property that I call it no man's land because it is a corner piece of property that the how long do goats live? Approximately 16 years. Depends how you treat them and what they're doing. But no man's land has a ton of kudzu in it. So once
you just got kudzu,
we head on in and we graze the kudzu for the county. But because I started with 2 goats originally, and my children and I would go out and walk through the property with the goats. They know who I am. And if I think they're getting too far into the kudzu patch or closer to a road, I call to them and they come back and know it's time to go home.
Wow. So,
but it's a bond. It's a caring. I care about them. I've had animals that were, I'll say, on the far side of the property grazing, and they go with the dog. I don't go with them every day, but when they go to fenced areas on the property, one of them was in labor and she left the herd and walked back to the barn and called. So I went down to the gate, opened the gate, let her up into the barn, and an hour later, there were the kids.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Well, I mean, they know who I am because I'm here daily. My husband originally, with the teaching schedule that he had, and then with the children, there's not a school in the Atlanta area that seems to have the same schedule for being off and being on. So we did our family stuff around the goats. And for my children to go, quote, on a vacation, we went to the fair and spent the night at the fair with the animals, showed the goats the next day, and they had a friend group of other children that had animals as well. So that, it wasn't just us being here solitarily. But that, it made for a nice life.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. And are your kids going to take over for you?
Probably not. they see it as a lot of work. They're very helpful, and they do a great job with it. But my daughter is working on being a mathematics teacher for high school, I believe.
Okay.
And my son has been a rocket scientist since the day he was born. So he does his online classes during COVID, and then he'll go back to college, and we'll see where his path takes him. But
gotcha.
They both have been extremely helpful, and they know they're goats, but it's not their passion. And for me, it is a passion.
Right. And I love that. Okay. So I'm going to go back to Nancy's question about commercial brands. Any that you like?
Oh, of cheese?
Yes. Okay, we'll just leave it at that.
When you start talking about those kinds of things, I'm a person who eats to live, not lives to eat. So for me, I appreciated the goats. I appreciated having a protein source that I could grow and use on a small scale. I mean, I've planted Austrian winter pea in the pastures where when the leaves fall from the trees, the goats eat the leaf litter, but then the Austrian winter pea, because it's got the sunshine, it grows in the woods. I've done all of this because I appreciate spending time with those animals.
Right.
So there's a cheese called a Humboldt Fog, and there's another Bermuda Triangle kind of a thing. And they're interesting and fun. So that's, I think, Cypress Grove. But there's plenty of wonderful cheesemakers out there. It's just what time you have available to you and what you're going to do. Like I said, I did the goat cheese for my family so that I could be a stay-at-home mom. Because if I walked to the barn, the kids could color and do things out at the barn while I milked. And then my mother was horrified. She said, Your swing set is so far away from the house. Mom, the swing set is between the garden and the barn, and that's where we spend our time. So it was a change for her as well.
Yeah. Okay, so on a little bit of a tangent, women farmers. I mean, there's a lot more women farmers now, right? Or do you see a lot more?
I don't know if there's a lot more women farmers or there's a lot more people that see us. There have been women farmers since, the beginning. I mean, all the way back. Because the women have tended their gardens and made sure they had food for their families.
Right.
It's just that, it depends on what you want to do and how bad you want to do it. The really nice part was that after I had my son, I had so much time laying down. My muscle tone was gone. I was slightly dizzy because, you spent so much time laying down. But my husband said, why don't you just go ahead and invest in a tractor, even though we just had the 12.5 acres. And so we invested in that tractor, and it helped me to be able to do that little bit more and little bit more. And the more I decided to do, and the more I showed other people what I was doing, because I wasn't, quote, farming on a large scale when we moved here. I was the mother of 2 children and raised my vegetables and raised my own milk and cheese. So everything that I had done up to that point, getting the degree in animal science so that I knew certain things to look for and diseases to be aware of, working at the laboratory to make sure that you're precise in your measurements. I mean, being a pastry chef, you're precise in your measurements.
Right.
And the interactions of your flours and your baking powders and all of those things. And it's just being aware of those interactions and making sure that the cleaner and more, it's how you decide to spend that day. Because I knew when the children were young that if I didn't know what I was having for dinner by 10 o'clock in the morning, the day wasn't going to go well. Because if you had ground meat that you were going to thaw for making your hamburgers, or if you were going to pick that cabbage and then have it washed and ready to saute, what was growing in the garden, what were you going to use for dinner, so that you you kept the flow of what was happening for the day, because originally I was making cheese in the kitchen. So
Right.
you had to have, if it was a cheese making day, and I only made cheese every other day to every third day when I first started. And so I'd make, a real fragrant Indian dish on the day that I wasn't making cheese, because that would give all those aromas to the kitchen that you didn't want in the cheese.
Interesting. It's so interesting that the aromas and the molds and just stay in the air, which we take for granted because we don't see them. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's
female farmers. I mean, we're people who work hard. There's a lot of, fishermen. I grew up on the fish docks of New Jersey. Hard work is hard work any way you slice it. But if you decide you're going to keep that muscle tone and give yourself a healthful life, whether it's outside farming or whether it's doing something else that you're passionate about, that's what makes the difference. I mean, the pastry person who has to punch that dough and roll those loaves so that they come out just right, they're working hard as well.
Right. Exactly. And LA just compared it to the sourdough in San Francisco. It's the mold in the air.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. It tastes so much different. So, ma'am, we could talk much longer, but it's been 45 minutes now. So I have one final question for you. What is your favorite food and drink?
Oh my goodness.
I didn't prep you for that.
No. Unsweet tea, no ice, or a dark beer.
Okay.
And favorite food, it's vegetables. I just love them. Sauteed onions and peppers and whatever else you might do. Eggplant. I love the seasonality of all of those vegetables. The purple top turnips, because for years I was just growing what would grow with the seasons. If you put stewed tomatoes and purple top turnips together and saute those for a while, the turnips soften in the tomato sauce, and then you add a little bit of allspice and onion, and it's a wonderful dish.
That sounds delicious. Yeah, yum.
So vegetables.
Vegetables, that's a good thing. And the fact that you like them all year long is even better because, and what you grow. So that makes it even more nutritious and more delicious as well.
Well, the hard part when I was pregnant was that I wasn't doing a lot of farming, and you had to go to the store and decide what to buy. It was a whole different mindset of going outside and seeing what was there and making the dish from what you had.
Very true. That's very true. You're living off your own land versus the plethora that's in the grocery store. Right. Yeah.
It was really a change. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. What do I?
What do I want to eat? Right. Yeah.
What should I make? There's so much here. Then you had to make that decision a different way, but it was all good fun.
That's such an interesting concept to think about. It's like, there is no decision to make. You eat what you have right here. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, you decide what's going to go with what, but otherwise.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
It was so nice to see you in person when I was in Atlanta, and I got to go to the Freedom Farmers Market. So if you're watching this and you're in Atlanta, you can find Mary at Freedom Farmers Market every Saturday from 8 to noon. 8 to noon. Okay. All right. And can they find you anywhere else besides your website? Can they order online?
No. It's a fresh product. We do that farmers market, Pine Street Market in Avondale.
Okay.
And there's a place called Chop Shop on Memorial that started, and that's Charlotte, Swansea.
Yep.
We've got Riverview Farm. They finally put a shop in town. So between the Pine Street Market and Chop Shop, but with COVID, there's been so little extra cheese because at first when they said the markets were closing, I sold a portion of the herd because I couldn't fathom milking them and not having a place for all that to go. So those are the two right at the moment that I do.
Okay. All right. And I will post all of those on here So that's Kevin, right? Pine Street Market is Kevin.
Rusty.
Oh, sorry, Rusty. And then Chop Shop. Yep. Okay, perfect. And well, that's fantastic. So, and then if you ever visit Atlanta, just make sure you go to all those places and find Mary's Cheese.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And everybody, thank you so much for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast live. And I have been chatting with the wonderful Mary Rigdon of Decimal Place Farm in Atlanta, Decimal Place Goat Dairy in Atlanta, Georgia. So make sure you check her out. And until next time, stay safe and eat well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.